It is the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left, says Perlman. Not what we hoped to have, not what we expected we would have, with what we actually have left. With what we have been given, with what actually shows up. It's like Perlman knew something about the human spirit, about discipline, about persistence and gratitude. He contracted polio at the age of 4, a full year after being denied entrance to the Schulich Conservatory at the age of 3, for being too small to hold a violin. He instead taught himself how to play using a toy fiddle until he was old enough and big enough to reapply and gain admission. Perlman fell in love with the violin as a toddler when he heard a classical piece on the radio in Tel Aviv. And he knew that he wanted to learn how to play. It is the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left. We are all artists in some way. Artists who have the opportunity to piece together from the material of our lives something meaningful. Choosing which moments to emphasize and which of our stories land on the cutting room floor. As human beings, we have the opportunity, the privilege, the responsibility, some might even say the burden, to choose how the pieces of our lives fit together. To decide what is figural and what we allow to just fade into the background. And it turns out that there is an enormous benefit, both short-term and long-term, both for ourselves and for those around us. There's an enormous benefit physically and emotionally when we choose to focus our attention on gratitude. Now, if that is in fact true, I just find myself wondering, why wouldn't everyone just be running around dripping in gratitude? In some sense, it has to do with how we are wired. It actually has to do not with our hardwiring, but with our brains. Neuroscience now tells us that our brains are not hardwired machines that we once thought that they were, fixed in time after a certain point in our maturity, but they are still wired in a sense. The new understanding is that our brain can change and reorganize, adapt and learn and reprogram itself to a new wiring. It's called neuroplasticity. And it doesn't matter how old you are, or your previous experience, or even your current challenges. Dr. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist at UC Berkeley, writes, "We now know the mind takes the shape of whatever it rests upon." Or more exactly, the brain takes the shape of whatever the mind rests upon. You can actually physically change the structure of your brain. So if you regularly rest your mind on regrets or resentments, on quarrels with others or self-reproach, or on that voice in the back of your head yammering away about what a nobody you really are, and if others only knew better, etc. If you rest your mind there, it will change your brain in that particular direction. Because neurons that fire together, they say, wire together. For better or for worse. On the other hand, he writes, if you rest your mind on those things that are going well, what you're grateful for, good connections that you have with others, your good qualities, what you accomplish in a day, the conditions in the world that are okay, you're going to build up neural substrates and circuits of positivity. And you'll be more likely to think positive things and feel gratitude in the future. So our brain and circuits of gratitude are essentially like a muscle that has to be exercised and flexed and used. Some of us may begin with weaker gratitude muscles than others, but everyone benefits from daily or weekly use. Every day, our brains are inundated with data. And if we are on autopilot, we allow the loudest, brightest, most repetitive stimulus to win. In other words, if we're not paying attention, we let the outside world compel our attention, allowing the world to randomly impact the physical structure of our brain. On the other hand, if we make a choice to direct and to focus our attention to wherever we want it to go, we can notice that loud and bright or repetitive message, and also make a choice about how much space we give those messages in our heads. But doing so takes practice. And with practice, we can select what deserves our attention so that we can act instead of react. Choosing what to attend to, what we actually make figural, is not just simply about shifting focus from the external world, what is out there, to the internal world, what is in here. Our internal world is actually full of all kinds of chatter as well. I don't know about your mind, but I actually have a full-on crowd going on in my head at any given point. And the brain takes up the shape of whatever its mind is sitting upon. So sorting through our internal world in order to focus it can be even harder, even more difficult than filtering out outside negative distractions. Dr. Hansen suggests that our nature as animals at the top of the food chain is the product of 3.5 billion years of evolution. And in particular, 600 million years of the evolution of the nervous system. So in our history, those ancestors who were good at resting their attention on something benign for long periods of time were in fact eaten. It's true. They were eaten because they weren't nervously scanning for shadows and slithers and snarls, right? We are essentially the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of very nervous and very cranky and likely quite negative ancestors. Survival of the fittest was pretty brutal, you remember? So the nature of the brain is to have a monkey mind, literally. It's no surprise then that the combination of our biological tendency and our personal history and our culture has habituated us to an incredibly dense incoming stream of a particular kind of data: fearful, negative, and nervous. Dr. Hansen argues, in that larger context, it's totally understandable that the untrained mind is continually scanning for either something to want or something to fear. In other words, it's looking for a problem to solve. So life in our monkey brain is a problem. It's not a gift. We have to retrain and regularly remind ourselves that life is in fact a gift. And gathering in a community like this is one way to do that on a regular basis. And if you're constantly threatened today, your brain is likely preparing you for the wrong kinds of threats. It is instead resilience that we need to persevere today's challenges and threats on us, because we are no longer the hunted. What we need and what benefits us the most, even if we're under enormous amounts of stress, is resilience and persistence, compassion and empathy. And all of these emotional patterns, all of these neurological destinations, these traits, are actually built from the practice of gratitude. That's why, as William James said, the education of attention would be an education par excellence. If we don't have control over that spotlight of what we're paying attention to, if our minds are stimulus bound, to use the phrase of cognitive psychology, constantly reacting to the outside world, then we have no control over our mind. And we pretty much have no impact how our brain changes and develops over time, when we could be shaping it for a more resilient and even happier future. So therein lies the reasoning for practicing directing our attention to some sort of discipline on the brain, to play an instrument, to meditate, to focus our attention on something regularly every day, and ideally something that benefits us and not something that puts us further into negativity. Dr. Robert Emmons from UC Davis has discovered in his research that we can directly affect our capacity for resilience, as well as positively affect our emotional and physical health by simply regularly turning our attention to gratitude. It's actually quantifiable. According to Dr. Emmons, the practice of gratitude can increase the experience of happiness about 25%. The most common method used in their research is to ask people to keep a gratitude journal, where people are invited to write something that they are grateful for, and doing it 4 times a week for as little as 3 weeks is often enough to create a meaningful difference in one's happiness and can create an effect that lasts up to 6 weeks. So if coming to church and the opening words is the first time once a week for you, let me give you another opportunity right now. Take a moment and think about 5 things that you're grateful for that are not of your own doing, that were gifts. I'll wait. Did you come up with 5? You can nod. Now, you only have to do it 2 more times this week, and you're 1/3 of the way to 25% more happy. Another exercise that Dr. Emmons recommends is to write a gratitude letter to a person who has exerted positive influence in your life, but who you've not properly thanked in the past. And ideally, and when possible, to actually meet that person and read the letter to them face to face. Gratitude, it also seems, is contagious. Dr. Emmons' research shows an increase in reported connectedness to other people, as well as an increased likelihood of helping another person deal with a personal problem, which then gives them something to be grateful about. So it really is, in fact, contagious. Now, there are, in fact, some side effects that I need to warn you about of choosing to focus our attention regularly on gratitude. Dr. Emmons' research has shown increased hours and quality of sleep, more optimistic expectations for the coming week, a decrease in blood pressure, and fewer reported physical symptoms, including pain. There even seems to be a correlation between those who practice gratitude with increased time spent exercising. So maybe you could even use gratitude as your next new weight loss plan. It would be easy to explain away Itzhak Perlman's experience of making it through the entire symphony with only 3 strings to some rare and creative genius. Perlman drew from a very deep well that day, a well of discipline and skill, but he also did not let himself be flustered by the setback in the moment. He chose instead to see his circumstance as an opportunity, to stretch himself, to reach even deeper than he had before, so that instead of being disappointed or paralyzed, he actually had an experience of increased creativity and innovation. Perlman was drawing on his resilience, and resilience is built from gratitude one day at a time. Dr. Emmons suggests many other strategies to cultivate a more grateful approach to life, but he also warns that these exercises are not for everyone, especially whom he calls the intellectually lethargic, which is a great term that I'm going to use again and again. The intellectually lethargic. Because, see, he says the discipline of gratitude is actually pretty hard work. In his most recent book, Emmons stresses that gratitude is actually incompatible with feelings of victimhood or entitlement, or even with the inability to recognize one's shortcomings or admit that one is not self-sufficient. So it seems that gratitude and entitlement cannot coexist, and gratitude and perfectionism cannot coexist. And so to counter either entitlement or perfectionism, you need a solid gratitude practice. A sense of entitlement or deservingness, he says, blocks the recognition that other people or fortunate circumstances are at least partly responsible for the good things that happen to us. When we believe that we're entirely self-sufficient, entirely in control of our lives, When we take all of the credit for the good things that happen to us, it's difficult to feel a sense of indebtedness or a sense of gratefulness in life. And so when something actually out of control, completely out of our control happens, we have no reserve from which to draw. Dr. Emmons believes that far from being a warm and fuzzy sentiment, real gratitude is morally and intellectually demanding. It requires contemplation, reflection, and discipline, and can be difficult and painful even work. To seek the good in each day, in each moment, requires you to choose gratitude over and over again with contemplation, reflection, and discipline. And if you do, you can not only increase your happiness, but also create a storehouse of resilience that's available when times really do get tough. One definition of suffering that I think relates here is wanting things to be different than they actually are. And so it is the artist's task to make beautiful music with what you have left. Gratitude, you see, is a choice. It doesn't depend on circumstances or genetic wiring or something that we have no control over. It makes life better for ourselves and for other people. When things go well, gratitude enables us to savor the things that are going well. And when things go poorly, gratitude enables us to handle those situations even better, with resilience, creativity, and compassion, with connection and empathy. And when negative situations are long-term, gratitude allows us the storehouse from which to gather clarity to make the next best right choice for us, despite that long-term setback. So I want you to leave this morning with a story that emphasizes the impact of choosing a grateful mind. It's about a young boy who sat on the steps of a building with a hat by his feet, holding up a sign that said, "I'm blind, please help." There were only a few coins in his hat when a man who was walking by took a few coins from his own coat pocket and dropped them into the hat. And then he picked up the sign and turned it around and wrote something on the back and put it back so that what he had written was then displayed. Later on that day, the man who changed the sign came back to check on the boy. And when the man approached, the boy recognized the man's footsteps and asked, "Were you the one who changed my sign this morning? What did you write? My hat is almost full." The man said, "I only wrote the truth. I said what you said, but in a different way. I wrote, 'Today is a beautiful day, but I cannot see it.'" Every time we gather for worship, we begin with gratitude. It is the basis of our values. This is indeed a day not of our own making. Let us be awakened to it and be glad. Choose gratitude.